Can't see him. I've got Susie, Darren, Dave, Lynn, me, Matt.
And the meeting's now live.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Portsmouth City Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Steve Pitt, the Deputy Leader of the Council. Apologies today from Councillor Vernon Jackson, who is ill. So I will be chairing. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting, and there has been the opportunity for written representations to be submitted. We are meeting virtually in response to limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. For the purposes of this meeting, the City Solicitor has advised that pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020, number 392, referred to as the regulations. Members, please keep your cameras on throughout the meeting and only turn on microphones when you need to speak. Officers, please keep your cameras off unless you are actually invited to speak. I can now ask the Cabinet members to introduce themselves, and then I'll come to any other councillors who are in the meeting and planning to give deputations. So I've already introduced me, so I will now go to Lynn.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Lynn Stagg, Traffic and Transportation Cabinet Member.
Okay, Dave.
There I am. Yeah, Dave Ashmore, Environment and Climate Change.
Darren.
Darren Sanders, the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness.
Thank you. Hugh.
Hugh Mason, Cabinet Member for Planning Policy.
Susie.
Good afternoon, Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Thank you. Matt.
Matthew Willington, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
Right, now I'm struggling because I can't see anybody else on the bottom of my screen. So any other remaining Cabinet members in the meeting, please speak up.
Indeed. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Atwell, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Thanks, Chris. Any more? I had tentative acceptance from Councillor Lee Hunt for today, but he has got another matter he's trying to deal with, so he may join the meeting late. And as I've already given apologies for Councillor Vernon Jackson, so I think I'm right in saying that currently there is only one councillor with us who's given a couple of deputations later. So Cal.
Councillor Cal Corkery, representing Charles Dickens Ward and member of the Labour Group.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Just checking, are there any other councillors in the meeting who wish to make themselves known and wish to speak on any items today? No, okay, we'll move on then. Members, I will take this as confirmation by silence. Are there any declarations of interests? Speak now. No, okay, Anna, please note no declarations were given. We have the record of the previous decision meeting, which was on the 6th of October, and therefore we need to, I think, confirm those minutes. Is that right, Anna? You want them approved?
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Can I have a proposer for those minutes? Darren, thank you, and a seconder. Hugh, thank you very much indeed. Okay, that takes us to the main part of the agenda, and item 4 on today's agenda is the Skills and Labour Market Strategy, and we have Jane Lemaire and Steph Parker with us to present, I believe.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jane.
Didn't quite get that right, sorry. So we're presenting the Skills and Labour Market Strategy 2020 to 2025. Originally requested by Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure and Economic Growth. The Portsmouth Economic Development and Regeneration Strategy 2019 to 36 was approved at full council meeting on the 15th of October 2019, and this called for a specific skills strategy, recognising that we didn't have one and hadn't had one for the last 10 years. Under the Economic Growth Manager, there was significant work done throughout 2019, with a planned publish date earlier this year, which was delayed due to COVID. The process included extensive consultation, to provide a strategy for the city, led by the city and including very significant employer survey. Shaping Portsmouth and Partners created the Employer Skills Survey, which was financially supported by PCC, Shaping and skills providers, and was carried out throughout 2019. The results informed the main draft of this. Work was then completed across the council, including engaging with all directorates and SMTs to ensure that it aligned with all of our cross-council work. The Shaping Portsmouth Business Leaders Group has engaged and seeks to take ownership of the action plan to ensure that we have a clear reporting mechanism, and that the skills group of Shaping Portsmouth will then represent our businesses and ensure that we're fully including the needs of those businesses to drive the skills strategy forward. This is a strategy and action plan that not only looks to build upon existing good work and increase the current success stories, but also tackle the obvious challenges and obstacles that we're facing. The power of the project is very much within the action plan, grouped into originally 3 themes and extended to include a pandemic response. The skills and workforce strategy has been supported by the Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Education during its development, and I'm supporting its presentation as our internal lead for economic growth and skill, along with our internal lead for economic growth, skills and employment officer, who's the author of this document and who now sits within employment learning and skills in the planning and economic development group, and has done since August 2020. Sorry, I was going to say, I don't know if you want me to
carry on. No, carry on.
No, obviously we've shared the document. It's been a very consultative process. What we're now proposing is that we move this forward and turn it into action, so that we can start to collect all together the great work that is going on at the moment, but also give it a real form and make sure that we have impact in these very difficult times, with a seek to review as we move forward, noting that very significant work on this strategy was done pre-COVID, and we have adapted it, but we will need to continue to adapt and learn from it to make sure that it's relevant and impactful as we see a very changing economic climate in which we're working.
Thanks, Jane. Steph, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive. Yeah, that's
okay. Thank you very much. I'll lead off on this one just to say that I think it's great actually to have an opportunity to have Jane and Steph with us to shine a bit of light on the fantastic work that they do on behalf of this council, working with people to develop their skills, their literacy, their employability, and really honing down on some of those difficult cases and giving them new hope and new outlook for the future, which is fantastic work. And I don't think we talk about it as a council often enough to actually make people fully aware of the great work that does go on here and the great partnerships that go on, because Jane also chairs the skills group at Shaping. So we're completely embedded with our business community in how we develop and bring these strategies forward. And this one, in a way, partners the economic development strategy that we took some time back, which again was very much a consultative process and developed in partnership across the city. I just wanted to note my thanks on behalf of the administration for the input that Shaping have given to this. And all the other work that goes on around economic regeneration and skills, and for the ongoing work that they're doing to support the business community, particularly around COVID-19, with the Future Together work stream and the digital enablement work stream that are both currently taking place. It's phenomenal work, and it very much is a partnership. And as difficult as these current times are, it's also an exciting and invigorating one, because so much energy goes into trying to make sure that we're taking our city forward and giving it the best opportunity to recover, and giving those opportunities to people, particularly from our hard to reach communities who historically haven't had them. And we're really getting honed in and drilling down on some of that now, and it's fantastic to see. So thank you, Jane. I do note the fact that we are in COVID times and things are changing, and I know the report's been somewhat adapted to reflect that. We will be sure to review it and bring it back for an update at an appropriate time. But we did feel that it was important that it should be out there, and that it is a conversation that's happening now, and not that we wait to find out what the other end of COVID looks like, because some of these issues need to be tackled immediately. And there's no point in delaying any further. So I welcome the report coming today, and I'll welcome any comments from members. So my cabinet colleagues, Councillor Susie Horton, please, who worked with me on all of this. We do this as a cross-portfolio item.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I just want to add my thanks publicly to all the work that's gone on by Jane and Steph, and also just to endorse the point that you made there. We're actually as two separate cabinet roles for the first time, I think, in quite a while. We've been working really closely. So from my perspective, obviously, I'm really interested in what's happening to young people. And if we look at some of the predictions of the impact of COVID on not just children in school and the impact of that, you know, on their exams and everything, but also some of the predictions around unemployment levels of young people, it's a very sobering picture. We do have a lot that's already been in place for a while, like I'm thinking of the apprenticeship week that we do, and also as Steve has highlighted, a lot of the collaborative work that we're doing in the city has been it was well established before COVID, and I think COVID has just really focused the importance of that. So and the final point that I want to make, without drilling down into all the examples, is the fact that for me this is about aspiration as well. We need to be doing work with kids in school through careers advice and guidance, but also we need to let them know through our relationships with local employers that they can be whatever they want to be. And I think that this collaborative working is really beginning to show, because we'll have a conversation, shaping are involved, council officers, and we really are a close-knit kind of group going on at the moment. So yeah, that's the important thing for me, is about what is the future like, not just for people who have now come out of work, whatever, but young people, because this is their reality now. This is their first chance at their careers, despite COVID. So thank you very much, Jane and Steph, for your work on this.
Thank you, Susie. And I've got a comment from Hugh, I believe, Councillor Mason.
It's actually a couple of questions to either Jane or Steph. First, it's really how the thing works. First of all, how are you going to integrate the various lead partners that you've got here? Because you've got a number of if I look at page 31 onwards, you've got quite a lot of lead partners who could all go off and do their own thing. So how are you going to integrate this? And the second thing is, how are you going to integrate this with the city's strategies for attracting inward investment into the city in manufacturing, trade and business?
I mean, it's sort of twofold. These are existing relationships that we have, and we already use the mechanism that Shaping Portsmouth offers us to make that work more collaborative and more successful. So certainly we'll continue to use the avenues that we have through Shaping Portsmouth as a very supportive business group to bring these interested parties through together. Obviously, as Councillor Horton and Councillor Pitt have referred to, this whole process has been a very collaborative cross-council piece of work. The working group that put it together pulled together colleagues from education, from employment and skills and economic growth. And during this process has also seen the restructure that came in August 2020 that moved our employment and skills work, so my role, underneath economic growth with Ian Maguire, to really give us a much more joined up and combined approach to this. And moving forward, that's very much how we're working in that collaborative space, with sort of looking at economic growth as a broader economic development, taking into account our more traditional approaches through the economic growth team, but also very much putting skills at the heart of it. And that collaborative approach is absolutely how we intend to move this forward. And by using the mechanism of Shaping Portsmouth and the Business Leaders Group to report on the economic growth strategy and the skills strategy is part of how we're hoping to really pull that together. But I think these are difficult and challenging times, and it will be about continuous review. Sorry, Councillor Mason, I'm not sure whether you said something there.
He's muted.
When you said difficult and challenging times, I just said, and how?
Oh, yes, and how. So it's very much about change management and working together and continuously reviewing what we're doing to try and make this work. But we have already seen some really positive partnership from every named partner, and it's about continuing to build on that.
Okay. Thanks, Hugh. If you could pop your hand down just so I don't get confused and think you've got it up for another one. I have no other Cabinet members indicated to speak. So thank you both very much for all your work on this and for bringing it along to present to us today. And I look forward to lots more engaging conversations with our partners in shaping and across the business community and across the education community as we take this forward and try and make sure that we're doing our very best for every sector of society in improving their skills and their employability. So thank you very much indeed. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were just noting that, Anna. I don't think there's any action required beyond that. Could Demo Services just confirm?
I think it's just to note it, yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. In that case, we're on to item 5 on the agenda, and that's the Tackling Poverty During the Pandemic, which is the action plan for the city. I'll ask Mark Sage to present, and then I'll offer Councillor Corkery the opportunity to make his deputation, and then I'll come to Cabinet members. So, Mark Sage, over to you.
Thanks very much. So I'm Mark Sage. I'm the City Council's Tackling Poverty Coordinator. So I'm the lead officer for the Council's current Tackling Poverty strategy, which ran from 2015 to 2020, working alongside the Tackling Poverty Steering Group, which is a multi-agency partnership in the city to guide the action on that strategy and lead on different areas of the work. Our current strategic approach is based on 6 high-level priorities, which are outlined in section 4.2 of the report. And as I mentioned, the current strategy runs until 2020, so we would have been working to renew that this year. Unfortunately, that work's not been possible because of the impact of the pandemic. But I also note in the report that the health and wellbeing strategy was also due to be refreshed this year. Tackling poverty is really central to the health and wellbeing strategy. There's a very close association between poverty and the wider determinants of health. And we know that people in poverty have worse health outcomes, and people with poor health conditions or disabilities are at greater risk of poverty. So the work to refresh the health and wellbeing strategy has been deferred until 2021, and the Tackling Poverty Steering Group has recommended that the Tackling Poverty strategy as a whole is refreshed alongside that health and wellbeing strategy work to make sure that the work is really closely aligned. But I think it's clear to everybody that the COVID pandemic has exacerbated many of the issues around poverty in Portsmouth and across the country. And we've included some of the local data around some of the learning that we have on that in section 3 of the report. So that we know that we need a response to the pandemic that can help to reduce the number of people in poverty and reduce the effects of poverty for people that are living in financial hardship in the city. So the Tackling Poverty Steering Group's identified 6 key areas that we need to address due to the impact of COVID. Those are listed at 4.7, and they are income maximisation, debt management, preventing homelessness, reducing fuel poverty, employment and skills, and digital inclusion. And so what the report outlines is that we're starting to develop an action plan to address those 6 areas. There's lots of work already going on, done by city council services, by partner agencies, particularly by the voluntary and community sector in the city, to address all of those issues. So the action plan isn't trying to capture all of the work that's going on. The aim of the action plan is to focus on where additional activity will support the work that's already taken place. And that's outlined in section 5.2 and in appendix 1 with a bit more detail. The timelines around that, the further detail on all the work that's going to be taking place is going to be developed over by the Tackling Poverty Steering Group over the next weeks and months. Some work is already underway, and other areas will need to be developed in the near future. In section 6, we talk about resources to deliver the strategy. So that's my role, the Tackling Poverty Coordinator role, in partnership with the steering group. But also we think there's a really good opportunity to create a kickstart placement for a young person on universal credit which will help to add a little bit of capacity to monitoring the action plan and some of the work that goes on underneath it, but also hopefully provide a really valuable opportunity for somebody who's interested in this area of work. We know that we'll need to do a good campaign around income maximisation and debt and accessing the help that's available. We need a communications campaign, so we talk about the resources that we'll need in order to put that out, so design and social media promotion, and there's an estimate of the cost in there. And then in section 7, we talk about some of the wider issues, because there are lots of things that unfortunately we can't address as a city council. We don't have the powers to. So section 7 really points to some of the key legislative and policy issues that fall with the national government that we know will have an impact, and there will be decisions made over the coming months. And we think that we should add our voice to the call to make sure that those things actually safeguard people and prevent people from falling into poverty. There are others. We know obviously free school meals is also a big one that is going to be discussed at full council, but these are some of the ones that we think will have the most significant effect for people in the city. So the recommendations really are around they're listed there in section 2. And it's really to kind of recognise the work that's going on, agree the action plan, and sorry, the other recommendations that are listed there. I can go through them if you like, but hopefully you can all see them in the report. So that was everything really in terms of my introduction, but if anybody has any questions.
Okay, so we'll come back to you shortly, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Going to Councillor Corkery now to do his deputation.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start by kind of picking up on the points that's made well in the report around noting the important work that has been done by City Council services in coordination with the voluntary and community sector during the past 6 months or so, during obviously incredibly challenging times. I think we've all probably been impressed and overwhelmed by the way in which people have sprung into action to support their friends and colleagues and neighbours that have had such a difficult time. Going forward, I absolutely agree with the point that's made in this report about tackling poverty being a key priority of the administration, and I think really local authorities must play a leading role in ensuring that tackling poverty and the causes of poverty are at the heart of everything that we do. I think the suggestion of taking advantage of the government's Kickstarter scheme to create a new role in order to assist Mark with his work is very welcome. I know you've got an incredible amount of information and resources and regulations to keep on top of, and on top of everything else. So I'm sure that'll be really welcome. And actually, I think I've probably lost count of the number of times I've been in various meetings, whether it's with relevant authorities or the community, where Mark has been referred to as a kind of font of knowledge when it comes to universal credit or food banks or other forms of tackling poverty. So I think that should be noted, and actually any assistance we can give to him in that should be pursued. Just a quick point, and I guess a question on that new role that's going to be created. I know that the Kickstarter scheme is about creating roles for young people who have been unemployed, and it talks about government funding up to the level of minimum wage. I just wonder, is the local authority looking to pay that person minimum wage, or have we got the flexibility, or are we intending to actually top that up to a proper living wage, or preferably the equivalent pay grades that would be paid to a local government officer in that position? So just a query around that, and a suggestion that we do explore that if it's been already. I think while this report does talk very well about the impact of poverty and the ways in which the local authority can use its resources and its relationships to try and deal with some of those impacts, I think it is important that we recognise we also need to be speaking about the causes of poverty, about how we've got here in the first place. And particularly if I think about my experience of kind of living in and representing an area like Charles Dickens, the past 6 months haven't led to lots of people becoming newly impoverished. Actually, a lot of the people that have suffered over the past 6 months are people that have been struggling to get by over a much, much longer period of time. And if you look at the stats that are kind of available that talk to this, I know the report refers to the indices of multiple deprivation, where most areas in Charles Dickens in the top 10 most deprived, actually some areas in top 1% most deprived in the country. The Child Poverty Action Group talks about a poverty rate amongst children of 57%. And we know that 44% of kids are in receipt of free school meals. Now, all of those figures are pre-COVID. They refer to long-standing issues of structural inequality, poverty, and deprivation, and no doubt they will have got much worse since the onset of the pandemic. I think that areas like Charles Dickens and deprived areas across the country have been battered by years of neoliberal government and austerity economics, which have not addressed the structural causes of poverty and deprivation, which we know, just to name a few, low wages, insecure work, unaffordable housing costs, and of course, benefit cuts. I think until we start to address and change those structural causes, and then whatever we're doing to try and ameliorate the effects and the impacts of poverty, then poverty is still going to be an inevitable consequence. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Mark, I'll come back to you first on the question around the Kickstarter placement.
Yes, thanks. I will need to double check that and confirm that, and look at what we can do on that, because I don't know whether we're limited by what we're doing in terms of other Kickstart placements, but I'll definitely take that forward to look at. So thank you.
Okay. Well, as a council, we've got a policy of paying the National Living Wage laid down by the Living Wage Foundation. For any staff that we bring in, so I would have thought that would cover the Kickstart placements. But we've still got Jane Lemaire with us. Jane, are you able to offer any clarity on that?
Sorry, just turning my camera back on. As things stand at the moment, the government funding only covers national minimum wage and not the national living wage, and that's as a national project. So that wouldn't cover the living wage. It is our policy for everything else. But obviously, it is a specific placement opportunity. But unfortunately, that doesn't currently cover national minimum wage. It only covers national minimum wage and wouldn't cover living wage. But as a placement was seen by HR to be exempt.
Okay, I'm going to make a decision here and ask for support from Cabinet colleagues. I hadn't realised that was the case with Kickstarter. I thought we'd automatically do that. Colleagues, I think that we need to find the money. We can't bring in placements and not pay them in exactly the same way as we treat every other employee of Portsmouth City Council. We are looking for opportunities here for some of these Kickstart placements to potentially be taken on longer term if job opportunities should open up. And remember, it's not just about us, it's also about our partners as well, and we want to be setting the right example. Colleagues, apologies to those who got hands up, and I've made a note of Chris, Lee, and Lynn and Susie in that order. Could you all, Matt is down to speak as well, but could you all put your hands down for a second? And just to be 100% clear, I'm going to add a recommendation to the report that the Kickstart placement and all Kickstart placements at Portsmouth City Council must be paid the living wage in line with the Living Wage Foundation, which will basically mean that the government will pay them the national living wage as they define it, and we will provide the top up. Have I any dissent from Cabinet members in that regard? No. Have we got a finance officer with us? Jules?
Yes, but what I would suggest you did was, in this particular instance, the additional cost of employment can be taken from the emergency assistant grant that the...
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Okay, that's added as a recommendation then. Thank you very much. And yes, not something that I'd particularly been aware of, but certainly not something we want to be doing. So I'm glad we cleared that up for you, Mark. Now, Cabinet members, I had Chris Atwell down to speak first.
Thanks, Steve. As previously mentioned by Councillor Corkery, Portsmouth has some of the most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. We know a third of households in Portsmouth have reported a negative impact during the pandemic. We know that negative impact in Portsmouth is greater for females, families with children and households on the lowest incomes. We've also seen a large rise in people claiming out of work benefits. since the pandemic. The Tackling Poverty Action Plan 2020 and its focus on the 6 key areas that Mark Sage mentioned in his presentation will help to reduce the number of people living in Portsmouth in poverty and reduce that negative impact for those people. It's a terrific and a very important report, and I'd like to publicly express my thanks to Mark for his work, both on the report and his tireless work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Lynn Stagg was next.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, I would like to add my thanks and congratulations to Mark and the whole team. I hope everybody's involved, yes, because it's a really thorough report. Very, very, very good. I just have one question, and it's only a little thing, but it's something I find very important. Under the income maximisation, do you include budgeting? Because what's one of the things that, in my experience as a teacher in an inner city school here in Portsmouth for many, many years, and a Home Start volunteer, the one thing, it's not taught in schools, and if you're living on a very limited income, particularly true, I think, today, with people losing their jobs as a result of COVID, and having been used to living a particular lifestyle, and suddenly, you know, you've got nothing there. Budgeting is absolutely essential, and I just hope it was included. It probably is, but I just wanted it clarified.
Mark?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The budgeting is absolutely very important. There will, with the income maximisation campaign, there will be lots of online resources, because Money Advice Service produces some brilliant resources for people who can use that. It's a key part of any debt advice, so anybody seeking money advice will get that as well. And Advice Portsmouth, our council funded advice service, offers budgeting kind of sessions for people. One of the challenges is finding the best way to actually provide those to people, because people don't necessarily want to come along in groups and talk about their financial difficulties. So it's about finding ways that we can get those messages across and give people a few tools and a few ideas that they can take up. But unfortunately, in the past, we have tried putting on a session and people don't, you know, it's not always taken up. So finding different ways to get those messages across, but absolutely lots of stuff around how people can reduce outgoings is yeah, a key part of income maximisation. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
And just to add, Lynn, that I know that the Hive are looking at work around the way to advise people with budgeting in particular, and that's been part of the discussions around the white goods store and community larder, etc. So I think they're looking at it as well. In the conversations I've had with Lou. Susie.
Thank you. In my first week of university, one of my lectures was on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and little did I know how much I would use that in both in terms of my own career, but also the way I reflect on the world. I'm sure most people know it, but for those who don't, basically you can't function if you don't have essentials. And one of those essentials, apart from shelter, is food. Who would have thought that in this day and age, in this rich country, that we would see what we have seen over the last few weeks, which is people genuinely not being able to afford to feed themselves and their children. So I think I have some sympathy with what Councillor Corkery was saying, that I think we'd be stupid to think that COVID has caused this. We know these issues were there already, but what a massive, big, shiny light COVID has shone on our communities, and the inequalities that are coming out. For me, obviously, I see that I focus particularly on children and families, but is really genuinely shocking. And I'm quite happy to hold up my hand and say that what happened over half term was both shocking but also quite humbling with the response from the community. We are very much a community who want to give, and also that what we saw last week was people who need to ask because they are literally at their wits' end and needing that community response. So whilst this report was written before the free school meals issue around half term, it definitely has dialed up the volume on this for me, and I know that we've arranged a meeting with Mark to talk specifically about food poverty and those children and families who are eligible for free school meals. I just want to make one point about the report that I find really positive, and that is about at the heart of it, it's about empowering people. We don't want to keep rescuing people, but we've got to twin track this at the moment, because people, coming back to my initial point, people who are hungry, people who can't see what's happening the next day and the next day, are not in a resourceful position to necessarily help themselves. So we've got to do both, but we mustn't take our eye off the ball, which actually, in an ideal world and an ideal situation for our city, that everyone knows how to help themselves. And we've seen that, we've just seen it in the last agenda item around skills. We see it around education. We see it around housing. We see it around energy, the stuff we're doing around energy and energy poverty. And so we do it all of the time, but this pandemic has demonstrated to us that we really, really genuinely need to be twin tracking it in helping in an emergency situation, whilst never taking our eye off the ball, that we actually do want to empower people to help themselves.
Thank you, Susie. Councillor Matt Winnington.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks to everyone for their contribution so far. Thanks to Mark for his presentation. I think it was, as ever, excellent stuff and an excellent report. I'd like to particularly focus on the well-being aspect of this, and actually some of the hidden poverty that we have in this city, because we talk a lot about certain communities are deprived communities, but actually, as we all know, within our wards, even some of the more wealthy areas have the hidden poverty, and that's one of the things that really comes out, especially as Susie has alluded to, has really been brought to a head by the pandemic in terms of people who are isolated, lonely, people who live in places where they felt they can't do anything, and especially not being able to go out, and the work that the Hive has done in terms of interacting with those people and making sure that they're looked after no matter where they are in the city has been absolutely invaluable. I'm really happy to see the work together in terms of making sure that Mark is supported in his work as the Tackling Poverty Coordinator. There is a lot more work to do there in terms of making sure that with the food banks and the places that provide food around everywhere is done in a better way. But also, I think that we shouldn't forget. Sorry, I've got quite a bit of feedback. Can someone can everyone mute, please? Thank you. Yeah. So to make sure that we look after people's, we remember, and this goes back to Susie's point, the basics matter, because otherwise people's well-being, people's entire core being, is a real problem. It can be really, really it can have a massive effect on everything in their lives. When I was a support worker, the people who were in crisis, almost every single person had a mental health problem, and that's the reality of it. That when people are in crisis, it affects their mental health, and some people have never had to deal with that before. And if we don't tackle it, the situation now, the things we're going to have to deal with in the future will just be even worse. No matter, not just about financially, but also about people's well-being and health. So it's a great report. Thank you everyone for the work they're doing on this, and will continue to do on this. And only by pulling together is this city being able to do what it can. Without all that pulling together, we wouldn't be where we are. So thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for all the work they're doing on this.
Thanks, Matt. I've got Councillor Lee Hunt. Lee, before you actually make your comments, could you just confirm whether you don't have any declarations of interest, please, as you weren't here at the start of the meeting?
Indeed. I just wanted to apologise for not being here. There's an IT issue with Teams, which our people have fixed. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Lee. I've got no other Cabinet members indicating to speak, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Mark for the exceptional work that he does in this regard all year round, not just during the pandemic, but all the time. There was a comedy moment almost to lighten the mood slightly during lockdown 1, when we were desperate to get takeaway food containers to be able to get a meal to the homeless that we'd had the good fortune to be able to get off the street and move into temporary accommodation. And Mark was riding around Southsea on his bike collecting the containers while I was sending him to takeaway restaurants. And that actually did happen. So as much as it was quite a stressful thing at the time, looking at it with hindsight, it was also quite an amusing thing to happen. But it just goes to show that the work that he was doing in supporting and working with the Hive during lockdown 1 and that he'll continue to do during lockdown 2 is absolutely crucial to helping members of our community. And thank you, Mark, for all that work and all the effort that's gone into producing this document as well, and the strategy moving forward to try and make a difference. And I think we do need to be clear, and as Councillor Corkery said, poverty didn't just happen because of COVID, it's there all the time. What we're trying to do at the moment is stop more people falling through the net and help those people who are the worst affected at the same time. But as a council, if you can't help vulnerable people, there's not much point in being a council, frankly. It is our job to care for all members of our community and the vulnerable ones above all others, in my view, and poverty makes you vulnerable for the reasons that Mark's outlined earlier on. So this isn't the solution to that problem, but it is a way of addressing some of the most prescient issues around it. But it is also about where we can look to these key strands to add more capacity going forward, and where we might be able to augment what we've already got in train here and what we've already got funding for with further resource should that become available. So that's also an important part of this, is we know what we want to do and we know we've got the resource to do now, but it also tells us what those priorities need to be and identifying future resources. And I particularly like to take the opportunity, because it's so intrinsically linked, to thank Councillor Horton for bringing forward the concerns around the school meals issue with half-term holiday and Christmas. And obviously, as we said at the time, we didn't have the ability to respond in 24 hours to address half-term, but we do have the ability to have dealt with that issue for Christmas, and that vouchers will be made available to all those children currently in receipt of free school meals. And the important thing to note is that with furloughs being extended to the end of November, which may help some people from falling into needing to claim universal credit, but that's only going to be a delay of a few weeks, and come December, just at the most difficult time of year for a lot of families, there are going to be people facing redundancy and facing hardship, and this council is committed to making sure that we do all we can to support those people at these difficult times. So thank you, Mark, and thank you very much for the report. Members of the Cabinet, are you all in unanimity in accepting? My computer's just decided it wants to restart. I'm hoping that won't happen, so I've just put that on snooze, and I'll keep my fingers crossed it doesn't turn off. If it does, Darren, could you step into chair, please? But fingers crossed it won't. So, Cabinet members, are we all happy to accept the recommendations in the report?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Mark for presenting today. And Jane and Mark, if we can pick up on that wider issue around the Kickstart scheme, we'll make sure we meet that commitment.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6 then today is the retention of additional community wardens. Colette, is this you presenting? Colette Hill, calling Colette Hill. She was there a second ago and now she's disappeared. Is Colette with us?
So I am, sorry.
Oh, you are.
I got disconnected just at
That's
the
right.
crucial moment.
No worries. So, Colette, I'm going to ask you to present, and then I'll go to Councillor Corkery for his deputation. And just to remind everyone, if you're not actually speaking, could you mute, please? Thank you.
Okay, so the purpose of this report is to propose the retention of the additional 8 community wardens that we currently have, in addition to our usual 8, until the 31st of March 2022. Section 2 of the report covers the recommendations, which are that the Cabinet approves the proposal to retain 4 of the additional community wardens posts on a permanent employment basis, and also approves the proposal to retain a further 4 additional community warden posts for a further extended period until the 31st of March 2022. So the council employs a team of 8 community wardens, and since January 2019 we've also employed a further 8 community wardens who are funded currently until the 31st of March 2021, which brings the total number we have to 16, plus we have 2 community warden managers. The teams both work to help keep the city safe, clean and tidy, and to provide support and advice when needed, and they are currently additional team are currently funded, the additional 8 are currently funded from the Housing Revenue Account, Cabinet Reserves and the Flexible Supported Housing Grant, and that funding is committed until the 31st of March 2021. These additional community wardens provide cover from 8 AM until 2 AM Monday to Friday and 10 AM to 2 AM at the weekends. The team carry out their duties all across the city and also patrol the local authority housing blocks. Section 4 details the impacts of the additional resources. So the 16 community wardens deal with approximately 16,000 demands per year, and they're able to respond to all sorts of demands that are placed upon the service, and also provide visibility and reassurance with proactive patrols that are carried out in areas where we've already identified we have issues. Section 5 details the actual proposal for retention, so it's slightly different to what we proposed last year. We want to retain 4 of the additional community warden team on a permanent basis, and 4 for a further period until the 31st of March 2022. And that's related to the funding, which I'll come to. Section 6 covers the current costs of the additional team and how those posts are funded. So they're currently funded from the Housing Revenue Account, the Flexible Homeless Support Grant and the Cabinet Reserve. I've lost my place, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. So the reasons for recommendation are covered in section 7. The community warden team of 16 is able to provide that additional cover up to 2 AM and with an earlier start of 8 AM, which won't be possible with a team of just 8 community wardens. The team have made good progress to resolve and reduce many issues impacting on residents, the community and also local businesses. And the team have increased the amount of actionable work they're able to do, as well as carrying out additional patrols, providing that visibility and reassurance to residents and businesses. The equality impact assessment is covered within section 8, and there are no significant impacts noted. Section 9 covers legal implications, and there is mainly referring to employment legislation. 9.2 does highlight the fixed term employees regs 2002. There is a potential that some staff could tip into 4 years of service, but we won't know that until the recruitment to the permanent post is completed, and that's because we've had some turnover of staff in those roles. Section 10 covers the financing of the additional 8 posts. So table 10.2 sets out the funding model. So we have £183,176 provided by the HRA, and that's on an ongoing basis, which allows us to appoint 4 of the posts permanently. And then the Cabinet Reserves and the Flexible Homeless Support Grant providing the rest of the money to cover the whole team. Cabinet should note that 10.4 and 10.5 have comments regards to provision of that funding on an ongoing basis. And so it should be noted that the money from the reserve and the FHSG is only committed till the 31st of March 2022. That's it, really.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you very much. Undoubtedly be some questions. You've dropped off my screen, Cal, but Councillor Corkery, are you still here, and did you want to give your deputation?
I am still here, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
And just start by thanking the rest of the cabinet for taking on board the points with regards to wages paid to the young people taking part in the Kickstarter scheme. That potentially is not going to make a massive amount of difference to the council, I'd imagine, but it could make a really big difference to those young people. The minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds is £6.45, and the living wage is £9.30. So it's a significant boost that hopefully will allow them to pay their way and live a kind of decent standard of living. So thank you for that. On this particular report, I'm fully in support of what is being proposed. I think it's worth just reflecting on the great work that the community wardens do. I know that as a ward councillor, I find they're kind of an invaluable resource, particularly representing a ward where the majority of the ward is council estates, and they are particularly helpful in terms of linking up with the police, with the youth service providers, with the house officers, to try and address antisocial behaviour issues where they occur. And that antisocial behaviour is undoubtedly been the kind of number one issue in my mailbox in terms of casework. They're a really important resource and complement and work well with the other services that are already out there. I think it's may well have, well, we did discuss this issue at a previous community safety decision-making meeting, so I'm not sure if it's led directly from that or it's happened anyway, but thank you for those comments if they have been taken on board. I think as a general point from an employment perspective, I think where it is possible to make positions permanent, that is what should be done. Employing people year to year is one thing, but obviously that does have significant implications then for the way in which they live their lives, their stability, their financial security, their ability to put down roots and know what's coming in the future and all the rest of it. So where we can be sure or have some surety about year-to-year funding, I think it's important that any posts that are attached to that funding are made permanent wherever possible, which is obviously what's being proposed today. So thank you for the report, and yes, I'll say fully support.
Thank you. Okay, I've got an indication to speak from Councillor Dave Ashmore and then Councillor Lee Hunt. So Dave, for you first.
There you go. Am I on?
You are.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I was just like to say with the community wardens there, just how worthwhile they are, and just how, you know, the breadth of the stuff that they cover, and how, you know, why they're worth their weight in gold, really. One of the things they help out with is they're one of the first points of call for fly tipping, for example, across the city. While fly tipping is down across the city, everyone knows from a ward council perspective and from a resident perspective, there are certain areas which seem to be problematic. So, you know, community wardens can help in seeing that, reporting that, investigating that, and, you know, and preventing it. So their involvement in that can't be understated, really. They're also very helpful for being face-to-face contacts with people who are homeless or rough sleeping. They provide some support. They can signpost. They can also get support to them. They can build up those relationships with people. You know, and they've been a real help long before the pandemic come along with people who have been on the streets for whatever reason, and they have been invaluable during the pandemic into helping them get into safer shelter. And the other area which is a big issue a lot of the time is antisocial behaviour. We know that the police are working as hard as they can. They've got fewer resources than they usually have, and they're very stretched, which means they can't always be there to act as deterrents or preventative measures on antisocial behaviour. But we have community wardens that can be visible and be a preventative measure there and help out with the police. I think Councillor Corkery mentioned that, the liaising with the police there and helping support areas and communities there. So yeah, it was one of the things I remember when the Liberal Democrats first took over the council, we thought how we're going to help in these areas, and we decided to double the amount of community wardens to help things across the city, to strengthen community relationships, to help people who needed it, you know, who are on the streets, or to help antisocial behaviour incidents, etc. So, you know, I'd just like to place on record my thanks to the community wardens themselves and to the management team behind them there. I think they have been an invaluable asset to this council, and I'm happy to see it continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'm now going to Councillor Lee Hunt and then Councillor Lindstag.
And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so yeah, basically what Dave Ashmore has just said, which is fantastic. Of course, he looked after this portfolio of services previously before my coming along. One of the I think you will know that, and Councillor Corker will know too, that one of the first things I did was pledge to work to retain the wardens and to consolidate them further. And this report does that, as he has just mentioned. I really want to get to making all the posts permanent, and I shall continue to work within the cabinet to do that, because it's right. I don't like the idea, particularly of contracts for a year or for the 4 remaining, but maybe that suits some people. But I shall be talking to Colette. I must say though that this is a non-statutory service, and for all the reasons that everybody, like both Councillor Corkery and Councillor Ashmore has mentioned, these people, who are a great bunch of guys and girls, and the managers, right the way through to Colette, they all work enormously hard, and they go the extra mile every single time. And I know that Colette is working when she's not working to make sure that people in Portsmouth are looked after. And the wardens are absolutely key in that. Through the summer, dealing with the antisocial behaviour, down at the hot walls, dealing with this awful spike that we had of laughing gas in the summer. Now in the winter, with antisocial behaviour creeping back towards the housing blocks where the lights are. They're there responding to, and they work with the housing teams, they work with the housing officers, they work with the police, they work in partnership with a whole range of people. And it's absolutely great that Darren and I work so closely together to make sure that the funding is there, because they are very key to the broad spectrum of services, the broad spectrum of will, political will, I think, too, right across the council from every political party to want to help rough sleeping and to bring rough sleeping to a stop. We'll never completely get rid of it, because some people like to sleep roughly. They choose that lifestyle. Whether any of us here like it or not, that is their choice. And we can't change that. We can only go and help when we can. So I have to say to the Cabinet, thank you all very much indeed, this Liberal Democrat Cabinet, for working hard to find the resources to continue to do this non-statutory service. When and if for people who are listening don't get that, it means the government doesn't pay for it. It comes out the local council tax or the income that the council can raise locally through rents and so on. It's absolutely brilliant that we've all been able to find this money, and that there's cross-party support for the continuance of the 16 wardens and the 2 managers. So on behalf of the people of Portsmouth, thank you very much to the administration for finding the money again and for consolidating this service more deeply into the widespread services that we continue to deliver for Portsmouth, even in the face of this awful pandemic and massive reductions from, I have to say, from this, from as far as I can see, it's a very uncaring Conservative government.
Thank you, Luke. Councillor Lindstag.
Thank you, Steve. I'm a great supporter of community wardens. I've been out with them on 2 occasions, not recently, for quite a while, when they've been on duty, on patrol. And to me, they're the eyes and ears of the city. Absolutely amazing. And you have to have special skills, I think, to be a community warden. You have to have sympathy and empathy, the ability and the willingness to listen, point people in the right direction. But at the same time, you have to be firm when it's needed and actually maybe take problems further, which is why they liaise with the police or wherever it is. And it takes special people to do that, to be able to have a foot in both camps. kind of thing. And I know when I went out with them, I was just amazed how they knew their territory, if you like, their patrol areas so well. They knew the individuals, they knew the rogues, they knew the people who were really helpful, and they were always chatting to people. And they've become part of the community in so many cases. I know in my ward, they've set up football schemes in the summer, for example, on Baffin's Field. So they really are amazing, and they, when you think about it, they have no real power. So all their success is actually based on their own personalities, their own powers of persuasion, and knowing where to go. So I'm so pleased to hear we're keeping them on. I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I've got Councillor Darren Sanders.
Thanks, Steve. When we resumed control in May 2018, there were several surprising things. There are several unsurprising things as well. And one of the first unsurprising things is the police were stretched, and they were facing cuts, and they were just simply not enough people, particularly in areas which are not regarded as high crime areas, where the local residents feel that it's not a high crime area or not. So we said we would double the number of wardens, and we have. But also, as Lee has pointed out, it's not purely about people on the streets. One of the things I found was completely mad when over again was the idea that they could go on the streets and they couldn't go on the council estates because the housing revenue account money just wasn't there for them. And so it's absolutely important that some of our most vulnerable people, council estates, feel safe. And they know the police are stretched. We know the police are stretched. And that's why by having a cross-portfolio approach, which allows people to feel comfortable, because we know people were sleeping on staircases in blocks in Buckland, and we wanted wardens to go in there late at night to try and help them lead a better life, rather than kipping on cold staircases, because we think that's a good thing to do. So I'm delighted about this. As Lynn has said, they act as the eyes and ears of plenty of places. And we know in our own ward that when the police aren't there, the wardens are. And very often they're the people who actually do find out the information. And working together is absolutely crucial. I understand Cal's points about making them all permanent, but we are a bit short of cash at the moment, thanks to the virus. Certainly I'm interested in making them all permanent, but actually, Cal, going beyond what you're saying and increasing them if we can, because I think that's absolutely important. We will do that as resources allow. Because people living on the streets and on the estates of the city deserve to know that there are people that they can turn to if they want to feel safe. So I back this report, Steve, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Darren. Councillor Ashmore, you've still got a hand up. Is that a retrospective hand up, or it's disappeared? So I'll assume that was the case.
It was retrospective.
Okay. Daz, can yours disappear as well, please? Thank you. And then I can see no further. Oh, Councillor Hunt, you wanted to know? So, members, if you have spoken, take your hands down, please. It's a bit confusing otherwise.
Sorry about that. It's you're pressing the button and it comes up too late or too slow. So anyway, thank you, everybody. And I'm sure that on behalf of the people of Portsmouth, I'd like to thank the Cabinet and everybody who's found all this money. And if we can continue to increase what this service does, is Councillor Sanders has just suggested, that'd be absolutely marvellous. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, final comment from me. The work that wardens do, as everyone has quite rightly said, is exceptional. I sat in many meetings with them and the police and other statutory parts of the council over the last couple of years. It's very obvious the partnership that the police have with the wardens, which is incredibly effective. Warren and Rob and their teams do brilliant work on literally every single day in this city. I've seen them intervene and help homeless people. I've seen them step in and tackle antisocial behaviour. I've seen them do that signposting work. The response sometimes from Mark Turner in the office around the speed at which fly tipping gets cleared is absolutely staggering. It's a phenomenal job. As Darren's quite rightly said, we'd love to have been able to embed all of the money for the additional 8 this time. but circumstances don't allow us to do that, but we can at least embed 4 and extend the contracts on the other 4 for another 12 months whilst we try to find out if we can locate the money for making their roles permanent as well. So it's brilliant work, Colette. Please feed back to them. The administration's grateful thanks for all the work they do week in, week out, supporting our community. Thank you very much. Colleagues, can I assume the recommendations are both accepted? No dissent?
Yeah.
No. Lee, if you could put your hand down because I keep looking at it because it's there. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much indeed to Colette. We're now going to item, and thank you to Councillor Corkery for your 2 deputations today. We're now on to item 7, which is the preparations for the new border operating model post-EU transition, or Brexit, the next episode. So we are, I assume, going to you, Mike Sellers.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, and afternoon, Councillors. Just by way of a background, the leader of the Council, Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson, our portfolio holder, asked me to put a report into the Cabinet just to update you on the port's preparations for the end of the transition period and how we're dealing with EU trade. And as you've quite rightly put it, Councillor Pitt, the border operating model, which is the new word for Brexit, I think. But just to give you a bit of background around the port, I'm sure you're all aware of this, but we serve the Western Channel. We were recognised fairly quickly after the referendum as a port of high impact, because of the amount of trade that we have with the EU. 66% of our trade is with the EU, and we've got more routes to Europe, more ferry routes to Europe than in any other UK ports, 4 of which are to France and 2 to Spain. Because of that, we were engaging with the government departments made up of HMRC, DEFRA, Border Force, and various other government departments that were looking at the changes as we come out of the EU, which actually stopped as a result of COVID earlier this year. And then in July, the government announced something called a border operating model. And the border operating model was to recognise the fact that ports would not be ready in terms of infrastructure from the 1st of January, and to implement a 3-phased plan to facilitate trade, import trade into the UK. To give you an idea, that the key dates really are January 2021, obviously when the first phase of imports coming through when we leave the EU. There will be no physical border checks, no differences to what we're doing now with regards to imports, but there will be a need for things like customs declarations, safety and security declarations, but they're not going to be checked at the ports and at the borders. And then from April 2021, there will be documentation checks of goods from a plant or animal origin. The key date for us really is July 2021 in terms of the physical infrastructure that we have to have in place. I think just one thing to highlight, our EU counterparts have been preparing for this for the last couple of years, and we were told in July that this infrastructure had to be in place and operational by the 1st of July 2021. So just 12 months in which to do this. And also, at the same time of the announcement, the government also announced a port infrastructure fund. And this was 470 million that would facilitate these infrastructure changes. 270 million for inland facilities where ports were not able to provide, physically provide those facilities, and 200 million for ports that could provide those facilities. We come under that 200 million. We will be providing facilities at the port or around the port. The criteria for that is to apply for the Port Infrastructure Fund is around import-export infrastructure, the core requirements of the border operating model, any ancillary infrastructure that's required to support entry infrastructure, such as staff and driver welfare areas, and access infrastructure, such as access improvements and traffic management. We have applied for the Port Infrastructure Fund, and to give you an idea of those changes, the first one is some new infrastructure for something called a border control post, a BCP, and that's around a requirement that DEFRA have in terms of inspecting goods from a plant or an animal origin. In order to build that infrastructure, the council are in discussions with a landowner adjacent to the port to acquire that land to provide part of the footprint for that infrastructure. In addition to that, we need to build a live animal compound for facilities for inspections. Just to be clear, live animals are equine. There's 9,000 race horses that come through the port. This is not live animals for slaughter, so not to be mistaken with that when we refer to live animals. We want to extend our freight gates. We want to add another 2 automated entries for freight to avoid any issues around the access and how close we are to the M275 and the Rudmore roundabout. And we want to do some modifications, some internal gate modifications for the movement of that freight when it's been inspected within the port facility itself. It's extremely challenging. It's a very tight time scale, but we, thanks to not just the port, but support from various other departments within Portsmouth City Council, we have now got a principal contractor, Kia, who are working on our behalf, and Royal Haskoning also helped us pull together our bid, which went in before the deadline, which was the 30th of October last week. Just one thing which I did put in and point out in the report is that we know the council don't have the funds for this, and we will be requiring on the Port Infrastructure Fund to provide that. Should we not get the Port Infrastructure funding, that could have serious implications on the roll-on, roll-off and ferry operations, given that a good 30 to 50% of the trade of the freight is of a plant or animal origin, so there will be a requirement for a border control post. I think it's highly unlikely that we wouldn't get the approval and the funding to build that kind of infrastructure, given that we are quite a strategic port and also resilient port, really, for freight and critical freight that can come through Portsmouth. I've added in the report that we've also had discussions with HMRC and Border Force around the Common Transit Convention. We do get freight, particularly from Spain, so we'll have EU freight that will come through to us and then go out to the EU, to Ireland. And as a result of that, we want to have an office of destination and under the Common Transit Convention and an office of departure as well. So that needs public-facing counters, which we can provide within the terminal, passenger terminal, and also we've got an area within the Ro-Ro port that will be used for those inspections by Border Force. That's all around imports. Everything that I've talked through really is around imports. In addition to that, there's the exports, and we do get 50-50 split, really, imports and exports, roll-on, roll-off freight. And one thing that the EU have been clear from day one, and the ports that we use in France and Spain, is that the UK will be treated as the rest of the world, and there will be those export checks. You're aware of the challenges because of how close our freight gate is to the M275 and Rudmore roundabout. The government's trader awareness, what they call the reasonable worst case scenario, is around a fairly high level of freight and businesses not being ready for the end of this year. So the Local Resilience Forum have a transport plan that they've worked on that can be put in place from the 1st of January, called Ops Transmission. and they've asked for funding from the government to facilitate the first 12 weeks of that operation. And that fits with the Department for Transport's estimates around trader awareness that it's going to be the first 12 weeks where there will be some form of disruption in terms of export traffic. Effectively, what the LRF are putting in place is very similar to things that you've read in the papers around Kent, where it's a pass system and triage and checks of that freight before it actually arrives at the port. Just as a consequence of the border operating model, there will be a requirement for customs agents, quite a considerable requirement for customs agents. I just highlighted in the report that Portico Shipping, which is wholly owned by Portsmouth City Council, does provide customs agents and have recruited and increased the number of customs agents to help facilitate that from January. So there is a good income opportunity there for Portico Shipping. And I've also mentioned free ports in this as well, because another consequence of leaving the EU is that the government have announced the possibility of 10 ports being up to 10 ports being free ports, and we are working with the Solent LEP to pull together a regional bid for the ports of Southampton and Portsmouth, which would be key really in terms of UK resilience, particularly around EU for Portsmouth and non-EU for Southampton. So that's something that we're working very closely with the Solent LEP on. Just one final thing, it's not in the report, but I obviously picked up very early on the skills and labour market strategy, which we did feed into from the port. But just for your information, when we pulled together our port infrastructure bid, we were asked in terms of direct jobs as a result of the border operating model. And the number we came up with, having spoken to Border Force, looking at customs agents, Port Health Authority operations, and also the operation of the border control post, is 130 jobs. So it's quite considerable in terms of the increase in jobs to facilitate the border operating model. And that's it. So in conclusion, PIP are working towards the new border operating model, very challenging timescales. The operation transmission will be required to support that trader readiness, certainly in the first few weeks around export checks. The port is providing resilience for the challenges faced around Kent, and you've probably seen that in terms of the framework agreements for ferry operations and some of the routes that come into Portsmouth. The border operating model will provide income opportunity to Portico Customs Agency and other customs agents. Free port status, we feel, will be hugely beneficial for this region and for Portsmouth. And in the event that the government funding is not provided for the necessary costs associated with this border operating model or ops transmission, we are aware the council is not in a position to provide the necessary funds, and the consequences would be very severe.
Thank you, Mike. I had Councillor Hugh Mason to speak first on this one.
Just two questions. Following up that last point, if we do not receive the upwards of 20 million, which we're expecting to get from the Port Infrastructure Fund, what is Plan B? What will we be unable to do? How would we manage? And secondly, the second question, quite clearly, the amount of change in our operations will have revenue effects. How are these being factored in? Will they be paid for directly by central government? Will they be paid for by the shipping companies? Will there be anything which is coming back to the port which we will have to account for?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I mean, firstly, in answer to the question around revenue implications, there will be additional charges for inspection of the freight, for the use of things like the border control posts. There are tariffs for that already, because there are non-EU goods that come through the port, and they go direct to the shippers themselves. So it's not an implication to us in terms of any revenue implications. but there will be a charge. I mean, ultimately, we'll all be paying for this in terms of the cost of goods. Sorry, what was the other questions?
Basically, it's your plan B if you don't get 20 odd million from the PIF.
There isn't.
How will you handle this?
In a nutshell, Councillor, we have to, and I do expect that the government will recognise, which we'll find out in the first 2 weeks, that we are compliant with regards to the Port Infrastructure Fund. Whether we'll get the full amount is another matter, but we will get. I expect that we will get some of that funding, particularly around the border control posts, because legally we have to have them in place at the borders to carry out those inspections. So it has to be in place. There's a caveat in terms of that fund. There's a paragraph within the funding that states that there's 200 million in the pot, and if it's oversubscribed, then ports may be asked to contribute. So there could be a need to contribute towards some of that. But the reality is that, you know, a good 50% of the ro-ro freight that comes through has to be inspected through these kind of facilities. If we don't have them, if we don't build them, then we're not viable as a port for that trade to come through to us. So it would have major implications in terms of the operation, the income at the port. And just to give you an example, throughout COVID, clearly that's had an implication on passenger movements through the port. But the one thing that has remained in place has been those critical freight routes and that trade. So I do suspect that we will get some approval. Whether we'll get the whole amount is another matter.
Thanks, Mike. Don't remember any of that being on the side of a bus. Darren?
Or in a leaflet or on a debate either. I've got a question for Mike and then some observations, if I may. Mike, there's talk around doing deals and stuff like that with the European Union. Is all of the work you've outlined conditional on a deal with the European Union, or is this just going to happen anyway, regardless?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor, I should have said that. It is in the report, actually, but regardless of a trade deal or whatever type of trade deal there is in place, this border operating model is required. The deals are more around tariffs and the cost of those goods coming through. It might increase the percentage of checks dependent on the type of deal that's in place, but certainly in terms of the infrastructure and the whole border operating model, that will be regardless of the type of deal that the UK has with the EU.
Okay, that's fine. So my second question, Steve, is you say the implications will be very severe. Those were the last words you said. What does that mean? Are we looking at clogged roads? Are we looking at a snarled up port? Are we looking at more air pollution as a result of both of them?
No, where I'm referring to in terms of severe, if we don't get the funding for this, the trade will not, it just will not come through us. We have to have this infrastructure in place by the 1st of July for that trade to come through this port. If not, traders will seek an alternative. The implication would be the income the port generates and the support that provides to the council and council services. In terms of any transport implications, clearly the ops transmission and the work that the LRF have put in place around checking exports, if they get the funding from the government to put that in place, then we don't expect that the city will see much in the way of a difference in the way that trade is moving through the ports.
Okay, I think that's very helpful, Mike. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's a potential economic body blow if things go wrong to our city as a result of Brexit and we don't get everything we want, which is going to be very damaging for people, however they voted in the referendum. And I think your report lays bare the cost of making Brexit work for Portsmouth, which is 25 million quid minimum. Because if we don't get 25 million quid, we may be losing 25 million quid over years as a result of this. So I think the report is a very sobering and honest assessment. And I hope you get everything that this city deserves because we are next in line. If Dover goes wrong, they'll all come here, and that is really, really difficult unless we get what you outline in this report. So good luck, and if you need any help, maybe with providing a few buses to take you up to London or something like that, then we'll happily help you. But thanks very much for this honest report, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I just add that you're right in terms of those implications, but there are also opportunities. If we get this funding, we are recognised as a resilient port. Exactly what you said in terms of Dover, there will be implications at the short crossings, and a percentage of that trade will shift. And we're seeing an increase in unaccompanied trailers, so not the driver accompanied, but trailers, and a shift towards container traffic as well. So there's also a big opportunity for us post Brexit if we get this right and we have these facilities in place in terms of increasing our income.
Thank you, Mike. And I think we all feel very relieved if the government acted as swiftly on confirming that you've got that funding as they did in giving a contract to a ferry company without any ferries. So let's hope that we do get a resolution on that in the very near future. Just for anyone watching who's resident in the city, in order to put it into perspective, if the council had to find that £20 million that's required to fund all that infrastructure, that would obliterate all of the council's remaining reserves and leave us in a position where we could be facing extra scrutiny around our finances. It would effectively bankrupt the council. That's not something that we can tolerate, and the government has to step up and do the right thing. And please, government, not that you're listening, because you don't listen, but if you were, we hope that you don't leave it to the 11th hour and 59th minute to make that decision, so that you don't give Mike and his team unnecessary stress, or indeed the rest of us. So thank you very much, Mike, and the reports noted, which is all we're requiring to do today. But hang on, I've got Councillor Hunt wanted to come in.
Yeah, just following from your point there, Councillor Chairman. You say it would deplete all the reserves. Of course it would, and our reserves are being fast depleted already because of COVID. And we've got to find a lot of money that the government promised to pay us anyway, which looks like they're not going to do it. But also, for anybody who's watching, if we needed to find £20 million and the reserves were all depleted, that equates to a rise of nearly what? For every £500,000 that you need to raise on council tax, the council tax has to rise about 1%, there or thereabouts. And I'm sure Councillor Mason will agree with that rough figure. It changed a little bit. But so for every £500,000 you need to raise on the council tax to, let's say, fund this 20 million quid, Mike seems quite optimistic we'll get it. So, I'm being speculative, but that would equal a rise in the council tax of about 40%. Right now, 40% rise in the council tax in 1 year to pay for it. So let's make sure that the government does it. Let's make sure our MPs, in particular, get out there and start lobbying the government to make sure that Portsmouth is the port is properly funded. It's in their interest too, the government's interest as well as Portsmouth. All right, thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Thanks, Lee. So in summary then, thank you, Mike, for coming along with the report and presenting today. If things do change significantly, please do come back and update Cabinet as appropriate. And as Lee said, and Darren, we do wish you all the best with for the funding bids you've got in, and we desperately hope you get that certainty very soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, item 8 on the agenda today is an update on the other bête noire of Portsmouth right now, the Aquin Interconnector project. So I'm assuming I'm handing over to Ian Maguire to present.
Happy to assist, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian.
So this report's been prepared by your strategy unit to simply tell you where we are and what's happening next for the Aquin Interconnector. Members will recall that this goes back a couple of years as a scheme. The Secretary of State made a direction in July 2018 that this proposal would be considered as nationally significant infrastructure, so dealt with by the Secretary of State himself. through a development consent order rather than by local planning authorities under the Town and Country Planning Act. So since July 2018, the applicant, Aquind Limited, has been working to submit and have their application determined. They did so in November 2019. That came in and was accepted for examination by the Secretary of State in December 2019. So two key decisions have already been made that this is nationally significant infrastructure as the electricity interconnector, and that the applicant had satisfied the necessary pre-application steps, public consultation, document submissions, etc., to enable it to go on to examination. We are therefore now, following preliminary meetings earlier this year, in the formal examination process of the application. The preliminary meetings are technical discussions that occurred in August and September on how the examining authority, which is an appointed panel from the Planning Inspectorate, wish to prepare their recommendation for the Secretary of State. It follows a basic programme, and that programme is laid out in paragraph 4.3 of your report, of a series of deadlines of written submissions, effectively commenting on the application and then incrementally commenting on the comments that have been made as the key matters for consideration by the examining authority are refined by further examination questions issued by the authority for both the applicant and the stakeholders, Portsmouth City Council being one such stakeholder to engage with. We're currently, today is deadline 3, and the team is putting together our response on everything that was submitted at deadline 2 to enable the examining authority to consider that. There is quite a number of deadlines still to go, all the way through to the end of the year. Deadline 5 is the end of this month. We will then go into December, where there's a series of open floor and issue-specific and compulsory acquisition hearings. These are hearings that will be held using the Teams medium, much as this meeting, for the examining authority to take an inquisitorial approach to examining the matters, but they are to look at the submissions they already have. The anticipation is new matters are not raised at these hearings. It is for those that have registered their interest in the proposals and the proceedings to explain the submissions they've already made, and then ultimately they have to write them up and resubmit them as written submissions shortly after that. That will then follow in the new year a series of further deadlines and some hearing dates reserved if necessary before the examination is concluded in March. The underpinning processes of development consent orders is one of certainty of timetables. There is a 6-month period from the opening in September to the closing in March of the examination that is inflexible and will not be amended even in extraordinary circumstances such as COVID. What we are therefore working through is these series of deadlines to ensure that we can challenge the applicant's submissions, maximise the benefits of Portsmouth, minimise the implications through working on the requirements, which are effectively like planning conditions and other mitigation obligations that we are seeking to persuade the examining authority to impose upon the scheme, while overall offering the opposition of the proposals, suggesting that the examining authority may wish to not grant a development consent order for this if they feel that our arguments are persuasive. So it's an iterative process, so overall a large number of deadlines, a large number of exchanges of documentation to occur throughout this process, and officers are currently working with external counsel and consultants to maintain the council's opposition to the scheme, meet those deadlines, and obviously participate later this year in those hearings through to the end of the examination in March. One thing just to mention from the report, a specific issue that has come up with quite a lot of local interest is the issue around Milton allotments, where we have flagged with the examining authority and with Aquind that we feel they have incorrectly effectively managed the consultation in that area, in that allotment holders, in our view, should be identified as affected persons due to the rights they have over their land, and therefore have a right to be heard at compulsory acquisition hearings without having to individually register their desire to do so in the way that other interested parties might have to do so. That is a debate that's obviously going on with the examining authority at this time, and we continue to make submissions to them in that respect. our focus on the Milton allotments and the potential impacts to the allotments has given us some benefits. They have agreed to amend the order limits in that area, the red line of the application, if you will, to be slightly clearer about what they're trying to do in that area. We think they can be a lot more clear than they currently are being, and we'll be pushing them for that to minimise the disturbance both during construction and potentially for maintenance that the allotments may have to burden if the examining authority decides to grant the DCO. And a significant focus of our case looks at that part of the DCO. As members will be aware, the overall impact on the city through the disturbance and disruption, particularly traffic congestion along the route, is another key element, as to our open space and recreational spaces as they go through a number of those spaces, Farlington playing pitches being the most formal of the spaces they will be disrupting, and therefore that recreational disturbance as well as that congestion and overall disruption to the city are other key matters that we'll be commenting on. All of these have formed part of the representations we've made and published through the examining authority on their website, a website that I would encourage everyone to keep an eye on. It's a very well laid out website. This is what the planning inspectorate create to host their examining documents, and has a key timeline on it as well, with the latest news and latest submissions. So all the documents that are for consideration are available on that website. And those documents contain the council's latest position, both in objection and in information, and the work we're doing to support the decision and strategic objectives laid out by the leader to oppose and object to the DCO. Obviously happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ian. This has filled my inbox up quite substantially for the last few weeks, but of course it's actually been something we've been working on for over 2 years now. I still remember the first time I met one of the owners of this company when he didn't think that public consultation was important and that all he had to do was tick a box. And I said to him, if you think you can do that to the people of Portsmouth, then I refer you to a French phrase, which is to the barricades. Because you will not find that you will just be able to march in here and do exactly what you like, because whether you have permission or not, the people of Portsmouth will get in your way. And I think we've seen that with the Let's Stop Aquin group over recent weeks, who've stepped up and raised public awareness around this, which has been incredibly welcome. And there's no harm whatsoever to the council's case in continuing to fight these proposals. The very idea that we're going to have uncertainty around the future for our allotment holders, that we're going to potentially disturb contaminated land at Milton Common that everybody knows should not be touched, that we're going to take one lane of the Eastern Road out in chunks for goodness knows how long, and that we're going to shut big chunks of Farlington Avenue. This is something that affects the whole of the eastern side of the city. Can't even seem to get clarity out of them at the moment as to exactly how long they want to take the football pitches at Farlington for and what state they'll put them back in afterwards. And all this stuff needs to be sorted out in great detail. I think what it is important is to stress to the public, because I've found in a couple of interactions that it's been slightly misunderstood. Ian, could you just give us a bit more clarity around duty to cooperate? Because some of the public are saying, well, no, don't cooperate. We don't want you to cooperate. But it is a legal term around planning and what our obligations are, whether we like it or not. Could you just give us a bit of clarity on that?
Certainly will. So the duty to cooperate, the legal term, is actually almost slightly misapplied to this function. It is a term for local planning and operating with our partners, but we have a statutory duty to deliver the functions of a local planning authority. That includes the functions under the Planning Act 2008, which embedded this nationally significant infrastructure project system into the planning process. We are obliged, it's our job, you could fire me if I didn't do it, to work with the planning inspectorate to examine these cases. It has been a formally registered application which the Secretary of State has accepted as valid, and consequently, in the same way we're obliged to determine an application if we receive as a local planning authority, the Secretary of State is obliged to determine it through his examining authority, and we are obliged to play our part in it. On a more practical sense, of course, if we were to do less and just tick boxes in terms of that, working within the examination process, which obviously we are doing without prejudice. Our position is it shouldn't be granted, it shouldn't come through Portsmouth for the reasons we've laid out. But we continue to work in a cooperative way with the process, because if, notwithstanding our opposition, they choose to grant it, we clearly want to ensure that the maximum benefit for Portsmouth is derived and the minimum harm for Portsmouth is retained and managed and mitigated in an effective way. Following the grant of the DCO, the Secretary of State's role ceases in effect, and the discharge of the requirements, the planning conditions, falls to the planning authority in the local area. So, for example, the approval of a construction management plan that will deal with those issues of land contamination, traffic congestion, etc. If the Secretary of State feels they should grant this and allow that to be managed through a separate post-consent condition, the approval and management of that post-consent condition will fall to PCC as the local planning authority to do, and consequently we want to be there in the room when that is drafted as a requirement, so that we can ensure we are able to deliver it in an effective way when it falls to us to confirm its compliance at a later date. So we have that obligation both statutorily and from a practical sense to participate in the examination process to gain those benefits and to ensure regulatory control is maintained in a practical sense.
Thank you, and that was really helpful, and it's an important clarification for some of our residents out there. Councillor Darren Sanders.
Thanks, Steve. Just a few questions for Ian. These are questions that have been raised with me by various people along the way. Darren, we're not the only authority that's being affected by this. What sort of consultation and conferring with other local authorities is being done, Ian, to make sure that we can use all possible resources?
So we've been meeting with the other local authorities all the way through the route and other key bodies of National Park and Highways England throughout the last couple of years in the pre-application and early stages of this. At the moment, we have a regular meeting in between each deadline, with a new deadline for submissions about once a fortnight. So in a couple of days after the first one, we then meet as a cross-authority group to look at issues of commonality, i.e. matters where we are aligned or misaligned in our preferences or comments, and opportunities for sharing practice and opportunity. By way of practical example, of course, as soon as you get north of Portsmouth, Hampshire County Council is a two-tier system, takes over as the highway authority. So consequently, what we want to do is ensure that we as a highway authority within Portsmouth and Hampshire County Council as the highway authority for the northern part of this route are well aligned, because we don't want to have two separate transport management plans being discussed, or two separate compulsory acquisition strategies for highway land being discussed, because that will just cause confusion to all parties and therefore potentially opportunities missed. So as well as regular meetings as authorities, individual work streams are being picked up by highways colleagues or property colleagues where there is commonality and opportunities to work together.
Okay, I think that's incredibly helpful, Ian. Thank you. And my next bit is not with people in the UK. In the rest of in the European Union, it is not regarded as a strategically significant project, PCI, I think is how they describe it, but it is in the UK. Have there been any discussions? Have there been any discussions either about that or with people in France and other countries who are also opposed to this?
Certainly the certainty of delivery from the French end of the connection is something that we have flagged as a matter that the examining authority should be considering, because obviously they are looking for extraordinary powers, both planning and property acquisition, and therefore certainty of the project is extremely important. If the French end of the connection is not approved within the timetable of the British end of the connection, or at all, then obviously that removes the certainty of the scheme and makes the necessity of the compulsory acquisition and planning powers weak. We are therefore focusing resources on that conversation and working with our council to take advice. Obviously an area which our own internal legal and planning experts are not well versed in to move that forward. We don't have any connection, of course, with the planning authorities or communities on the French side as part of our work, because there is no consenting regime in the same sense as our DCO consent. So our cooperation focus has been with our neighbouring authorities between here and Winchester.
Okay. Finally, I'm interested, have any councillors come to you with ideas that you hadn't already thought of in terms of trying to deal and handling the planning process?
Well, we've had a number of meetings, obviously, throughout the last couple of years with various councillors. Certainly, I think the professional officer corps and the members have been well aligned. Whether any specific strategies or outcomes have come from councillors, I would have to go back and look through all the notes. It's been quite an iterative conversation as well there to ensure we're picking up on the key strategic objectives members wish to see and those key matters. So, for example, we've spoken to individual members about direct disturbance and impacts in their local areas, closing one road in preference to another because of location of a school, by way of practical example. Certainly the allotment conversation as well has had a lot of input from ward members in that area. So it has been a piece of work that's gone on with members across the affected wards through the last couple of years and guided by obviously the appropriate portfolio holders in setting those strategic objectives and providing us the oversight of the project throughout.
Thank you for that, Ian. I use that last question, if I may, Steve, because I think this is one of the few things that actually unites every single group on the council, which is rare in itself, and has united every single group on the council since we first became aware of this 4 years ago. I certainly remember the leader having heated discussions with Aquin after they decided to put letters through people in Milton's doors, implying that they were going to take over their homes. It is rare to see the leader of the council angry. But he was highly angry, and he was right to be angry, because I think the way that Aquin has behaved throughout this has been an absolute joke. Frankly, this is something that should be decided in Portsmouth because it affects the people of Portsmouth, but will create no benefit for the people in Portsmouth. I'm deep, and that's why I think it is important to maintain political consensus. I'm deeply worried about some of the comments of our Labour colleagues who've said that we as a council being pushed around by big business and central governments, which seems to be the complete opposite of what was happening. And also the council is not doing enough, which I find is more than a bit upsetting, because we can be better than this, and the city has to be better than this if we're going to deal with this properly. I hope this doesn't happen. I fear it might, because it's being decided nationally, not locally, but I want to do all we can to make sure that we oppose it, because it's bad for our city and bad for our city's people.
Thanks, Darren. Matt? We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Got you now. Yeah, got you now.
Yeah, problem with my muting. I'd just like to start by echoing Darren's final comments there about the length of time that some of us have been opposing this. And I remember going to a cold evening, I think it might have been at Milton Village Hall about 4 years ago, when there was the very, very initial plans about this, and they were presented as a completely new concept. Ever since then, I've been opposing that as a ward councillor for East and Craneswater, where of course this cable is planned to land. But also on behalf of the whole of the city and working with colleagues to oppose this all the way through. And I think it's important to understand the basis for our objection, and that the objection is not about the concept of an interconnector. And indeed, there are several interconnectors right around the country, and it's all about interconnecting the UK and Ireland to the European as well, with the interconnectors that are planned between places like Japan and Korea, and across the Mediterranean as well. These are clearly projects that are happening around, but it is about this particular plan. It is about this route that it seems utterly perverse to be bringing a cable, landing it in the most densely populated part of the south coast of England, disrupting the maximum amount of people you can possibly do, because you'll bring it ashore in the most densely populated part of the south of England, and it's nowhere near. You've got 90 miles of coastline. That is nearer to where the cable comes from France, Portsmouth. 90 miles of coastline. It's quite an astonishing concept, and yet it's coming ashore, or it wants to come ashore, not only in Portsmouth, in the most densely populated place on the south coast of England, but they want to landfall it on an island and then tunnel under the sea again to bring it up on the mainland and in the other bit of Portsmouth. To say it's a nonsensical scheme doesn't even begin to describe it. And quite frankly, the fact that what I'm most shocked about from the point of view of the government is that they took a decision to take the power away from local authorities on this, when, quite frankly, under any normal planning process, if it had been left to local authorities, we would have been asking for a huge amount more information until we would have accepted this application in. There would have been a huge amount more work. The questions that would have been asked for them to answer before the application would have been put in. I know Ian and his team would have made sure that they were that they would, in the pre-application stage, would have been asking a lot of those questions and making sure they were answered, because quite frankly, when we as councillors had a meeting last month about this, I was shocked and astounded by the amount of questions, queries that were not answered, that had not been answered by the applicants. I was astonished that there is virtually zero mitigation that's been put in place. There's been no offer of mitigation on things like the Fort Cumberland Road car park, where they're looking at taking it out of 75% at least of it out of action for a year, and at least 50% of it out of action for pretty much the whole of the project. These are astonishing things that have not been answered, that are not being addressed at all by the applicants. They still haven't got a single route all the way up, which again is astonishing, and yet they're in the stage of, we've got a month and 4 days before the hearing takes place. It really is treating our communities with contempt, and it's not just our community in Portsmouth, it's also the community in Havant Councillor, in the Waterlooville area, in East Hampshire around Clanfield and Horndean, and indeed go to Lovedene. And this picture of where I cycled earlier in the summer is just the west, where this is supposed to come up in Lovedene, a beautiful part of the South Downs. So this is affecting communities right across our area. It is uniting communities in opposing it. It is uniting parties on all the councils that this is planned to go through in opposing it. It seems to be a project that is an answer in search of a question. And the most important thing is, it's been done in this area for one reason, and one reason alone, that National Grid have decided that they don't want to invest in their energy network in terms of substations, and so they posited that Lovedene was the easiest, cheapest option for them to connect it to the national network. And quite frankly, it should be more important about the effect on human beings than the profits and the ease of cost for a big multinational corporation like National Grid and a very wealthy developer like Aquins. And so I'm really pleased to support the recommendations here that continues our opposition to this scheme, and I will continue working with all people in our community in Portsmouth and outside, and all political parties, to oppose this. And I really hope that everyone can get on board with that work that we're doing, and we'll be discussing this again next week at full council. But it's a poor scheme that this city does not need. It doesn't bring any benefit to the city, and just cause enormous amounts of disruption to our community. So thank you for the report, Ian and your team, and thank you for everything you're doing in putting very, very clearly the point of view of the council across, and raising those questions about what are those mitigations, what are the things that we need from Aquins, should, and I hope it doesn't, but should this go ahead, because if this does go ahead, then there is a huge amount of mitigation that needs to be put in place, because otherwise this city will be incredibly badly affected for a project that quite frankly we do not need in this area.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Kieran, you're with us, and Kieran's our planning lawyer and has been doing a lot of work on this. I'm just wondering, is there any comments that you wanted to add since you're with us?
I would just flag that in relation to the allotments that Ian's touched on, there will be a letter in response to questions we received from the planning inspectorate asking us to flesh out what our concerns are around the allotments in formal and technical terms. So that will be produced today and sent to the planning inspectorate this evening. So yeah, that's probably a pertinent piece of work for you to be aware of.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Colleagues, this meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. I don't want to rush people, but officers will need to be somewhere else. So I'm going to go to Lee and then close out this item and move to the last item so that we can get finished fairly promptly. Lee?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I mean, like the Warden report that we looked at there, this is our administration, this administration representing the people of Portsmouth, listening to what they are saying, and they don't want this. And we have, this Liberal Democrat administration has found the money to fund the opposition that it would have been very hard for residents to come together to find that kind of money, even with a crowdfunder, to fight this particular case. So I am, as a resident of Portsmouth, I'm enormously grateful to all my colleagues and for finding that money, and to the officers who I know are very hard pressed right now for doing what they are doing. And it's a lot of responsibility for them, and I know they're working late at night. Last I'd like to say is, to me, this is vandalism. It is vandalism, and it's sending a scar straight up the spine of Portsmouth. Nobody wants it, and we're all very well aware of the political machinations behind it, and it's so wrong, isn't it? If it was right, we wouldn't be opposing it. But the people of Portsmouth know that it's wrong, and like all of us, I live here too, and I know that it is wrong. So for me, this is just a vandalism. There's absolutely no benefit that I understand is going to come to Portsmouth from this at all, only a lot of hardship which has been previously described. It's sheer vandalism by the government in particular, an uncaring Tory government that doesn't seem to give a darn fig about Portsmouth. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lee. Now, in order to comply with process, colleagues, just to explain to any residents who are watching us today, that we accepted a written deputation from the campaign group Let's Stop Aquind. And normally we would have that written deputation after the officer's presentation, but I think due to the strength of community feeling, it was appropriate on this one that the Let's Stop Aquin group should have the last say on this item. So Anna, would you please read out their deputation for us?
Right, deputation from Viola Langley of Let's Stop Aquind. I am here today to represent our grassroots movement, Let's Stop Aquind. The last 4 weeks have been very informative and have made us change our focus and revise our aim. We originally just objected to the route, but now object to the whole interconnector project on environmental, economic and ethical grounds. It is wrong for Portsmouth, wrong for anywhere on the south coast and wrong for northern France. Currently we have over 1,400 active members, some of whom have dedicated themselves to investigate all aspects of the Aquind project. That is our strength. We are here to raise awareness. We are not experts, but try to find evidence which will support all the objections. We applaud the fact that full council support has been given to try to stop Aquin coming through Portsmouth, but we go much further. Our geographical scope includes the whole proposed route from Normandy to Lovedene. We are sharing concerns, documents and other evidence with residents groups, environmental bodies and public institutions far and wide, from the allotment holders in Eastney to the European Commission. While we recognise that councils must focus on their specific local issues, we would like to ask this question. Are you and your officers consulting and conferring with other local authorities to make best use of all resources? We have had to crowdfund ourselves to get printed our first leaflet to make people really aware of what is coming their way. There are still so many residents who have not even heard of Aquind. Aquind's consultation process with the public was inadequate and poor, and we should ask ourselves, is it not our responsibility first of all to raise awareness? Have you put money aside to heighten residents' awareness? On the other hand, our first success as a group was to get the planning inspectorate to allow consideration of several hundred additional public responses received after the consultation deadline. pipeline, the vast majority of which were from people who up until very recently were entirely unaware of Aquind. If we understand the process correctly, we have about 9 months ahead of us prior to the final outcome. We are aiming for tens of thousands of people to be ready to appeal the decision should it get that far and go against us. Our contacts in France tell us and have supporting evidence that a decision by the MREA is pending. Should approval be refused, inevitable delays and a public inquiry will ensue. Have you had already contacts with France? Are you prepared to take on the new issues which have arisen since the original application? 1. Interconnector capacity. Since Aquin started their project, a number of new interconnectors have either been built or are under construction or far advanced in their planning. Aquin is no longer needed. Political will in the direction of renewable resources. The PM announced the need for more renewable energy and become independent from Europe, yet we are supposed to want this privately funded interconnector cable. 3. Brexit. We are leaving the EU end of December. What consequences is this going to have on our energy supply from Europe? What are the consequences for the consumers? What about energy sovereignty? 4. Climate change and climate emergency. Aquin's cables are designed to carry nuclear power generated in northern France. Is this source not fundamentally incompatible with the Council's renewable energy and climate change policy? Mitigation does not deal with these issues. 5. The COVID effect. We are being forced to change the way we live, to take care of what we have, waste less, look for sustainable ways of living, and we will be able to go back to the so-called normal. Electrical demand has fallen sharply since COVID. Check out the global figure. A new economic model. Businesses are realising that huge commercial and retail spaces do not need to be lit or heated. Home working might become the norm. 7. The validity of the inclusion of two huge capacity data cables. Should this be allowed to slip into the project by stealth? Aquin would like the potential for a telecommunication network for commercial use. 8. Business model. Due diligence on Aquin Limited. A. 1.2 billion is mentioned for the project. Independent assessment suggests this is nowhere near enough. Inadequate funding could mean unfinished construction sites. B. Loss of PCI status. C. Aquin's company's house records show ownership of the project is very fluid concept. D. Aquin is seeking exemptions from the pricing mechanisms protecting consumers. 9. The morality of the affair. We question the morality of this business. Where does the money for this project come from? The cash for favours issue. Should we accept this practice? Will this council get behind a huge public push on appeal to help mitigate the democratic deficit of the original process? This is a grassroots movement where serious questions have been presented to us and we are seeking answers. We need to reveal the truth behind this project. Could some of the contingency fund be used to investigate the issues we raise? This is an emergency and we need your support. Let's come together as a proud city to stop this damaging and pointless private project being imposed on us against our will. Let's stop Aquin. That's the end of the deputation.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. It's quite a wide-ranging deputation, and it covers a number of emotional as well as real logistical issues and the questions around the process. I'm going to ask that Ian and Kieran, between you, if that deputation can be passed to you, please, on the relevant points around the council's involvement and the process. Obviously, you can't, as officers, get involved in some of the political opinion in there, and we understand that. But on those process points, could you, between you, work on a response that can be sent to Let's Stop Aquin, please? I know we've covered most of those issues in the meeting today. The group can be very assured we've gone and stood with you on the shoreline as an administration, so we are very committed to making sure that we do all we can on this, and we've got some highly skilled people working with the team at the council to make sure that we're doing all we can to oppose this and get the very best outcome from the city. And as Ian quite rightly stressed, it is important that should we fail and any subsequent appeal fail, that what we have done is fought to minimise the impact of this stupid scheme on our city that none of us want to see here. So we do stand with you. Let's Stop Aquin. Please be assured of that. And by way of this meeting now, I'm asking for Ian and Kieran to just compile a response to you, please, on the specific points that you've raised that we are able to influence and address. Some of them obviously are for a wider audience, and we don't. I think it's safe to say we don't necessarily disagree with your concerns. Let me leave it at that. So, colleagues, are we happy to accept those recommendations? We are. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Ian and Kieran, particularly for the huge amount of time and effort that you've both put into this. I know that, and for the Let's Stop Aquin group, if you're watching, these guys have been working till midnight some nights on this. They've put in a huge amount of time and effort. So thank you both very much indeed. And our very best wishes for all the work you're going to continue to do over the next couple of months or so, right through till March, because it's making a difference and you're sticking up for the people of our city. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we're now on to item 9, which is the Fair Trade and Nestlé paper. Who's presenting on this from a council officer perspective?
I'll present on it if you like, Chairman.
Okay, David.
Okay, so it's just to bring to your attention the fact that Nestlé, well, we've been a fair trade city, I think, since 2004 now, and that was reinforced back in 2019 when I think it was Councillor Mason took a motion through council. Subsequent to that, Nestlé have ceased their partnership with the Fair Trade organisation, instead using their own Cocoa Plan Sustainable Scheme, as they describe it, and using sugar beet, I believe, mainly from Europe. Clearly, that does present a bit of an issue, which you may well want to have a think about. The council is also obliged to meet with its various statutory requirements under procurement, so we must be cognizant of that. We've given you quite a few references in the paper to the dialogue that's going on and the context of that, but really this is an opportunity for you to consider how you might wish to respond in the light of that guidance. And you might, for example, want to make your views known both to the company, or I probably should call it the conglomerate, and the Fair Trade Foundation. And obviously it's open to us to engage with other fair trade towns and cities around the country in terms of what they're doing. But that's the position. Obviously, it's the sort of issue that sort of highlights some of the dilemmas that can arise from this sort of association, and particularly one that has the longevity of this. Things are going to change, practices are going to change during its direction. How our council is going to respond to that, and how is the Fair Trade Organisation going to respond to that? Nothing else to add. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Lynn Stagg and then Councillor Hugh Mason.
Thank you, Chair. According to Nestlé, the scheme is to ensure there's a sustainable supply of cocoa, because there's an increase in demand for cocoa, and unfortunately a lot of the farmers are small farmers, and lots of the trees are diseased, so the production is lower than it would be. But there's no mention at all in their blurb about it of maintaining decent wages for the workers. They're going to put a lot of stuff in, like putting in disease-resistant trees and providing social improvements for the farmers, including schools. There's absolutely nothing whatsoever about maintaining the high standards of wages for the farmers, which is what fair trade was all about, making sure that they were getting a fair price for their goods, and there's none of that in there. But they're not the only ones who've done it. Cadbury's have also done it in 2016. So, if you're going to have a go at Nestlé, we've got to have a go at Cadbury's, and many others maybe, I don't know. I haven't found out any more. But the scheme itself sounds a good scheme, and they have worked with the Fair Trade Association, but it looks as if things like this are going to be happening in many other areas, and that may put an end to fair trade, full stop, because if people are pulling out, producers are pulling out of the fair trade schemes, then it will eventually collapse. And there is no independent judgment on it. There's nobody. Fair trade sort of kept an eye on things, but if they go it alone, they're their own judges, and obviously they're more likely to judge in their own favour rather than for the national good. So I think it's something to be careful about.
Thank you, Lynn. Councillor Hugh Mason.
Right, Portsmouth is a fair trade city, and I think that we've been a fair trade city for a very long time. We need to take cognizance of the fact that Nestle, alongside Cadbury, has pulled out of this fair trade agreement. I'm very well aware that the world trade in cocoa is becoming very much more competitive, but I am also aware that the Anti-Slavery Society, Anti-Slavery International, has reported on child labour, unfair practices, very low wages in Côte d'Ivoire, and the End Slavery Corporation of the United States has raised the same concerns, noting that Nestle, Mars and Hershey have broken the pledges they made on child labour and on fair labour. And that report was, I think, 2019 that they made that report. So there are serious concerns here about the labour practices in the cocoa industry. And the Rainforest Alliance, which Nestle have used as a substitute, is primarily concerned with protecting nature and questions about communities are only second to the protection of the natural environment. So I think we have an issue here which we need to address. And I think the first action we should take is to contact the Fair Trade Foundation to find the full details of what is going on, of how serious the issue is, and then on the basis of the information which we receive, to make a decision of whether it is appropriate for this council to take any action, and if it is appropriate, what particular action we should take. So I would propose that as a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. And I've got no one else indicating to speak. So, colleagues, in view that the purpose of today was to have this discussion and decide a way forward, I think Hugh's proposal is sensible. Does any dissent from that? No? Okay, then David, are you happy to take that forward for us?
Very happy, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Anna, unless there's anything else that I have missed, thank you for your support today from the Democratic Services angle. It's very much appreciated. Thank you to other colleagues who joined on the call but didn't speak, and a particular thank you to Councillor Claire Udy, who I noticed sneaked in at some point earlier on just to have a little watch. So hi Claire, hope you're well. And on behalf of all of us, thanks for all you did last week during half term. Thank you all very much, colleagues, for today, and we will see you very soon.
Okay, so we'll close the recording now.
You may close the recording, Anna.